Readers are welcome to leave comments in the comments section.
My back hit the cold locker with a thud. I am Lexi Vance, head cheerleader, and I am 100% straight. So someone really needs to explain why my heart is pounding just because Morgan Steele, the brooding track star, invaded my space, her dark eyes locking onto mine with an infuriating, calm confidence. You look nervous, Lexi, she murmured, leaning an arm against the metal right next to my ear, dangling my forgotten crimson cheer ribbon from her fingers. My brain screamed at me to grab the fabric and run, but as the intoxicating scent of rain and cedarwood erased my ability to think, I didn't grab the ribbon. Instead, I reached up, twined my fingers into her dark hair, and pulled her down into a searing crush of a kiss that instantly vaporized every lie I had ever told myself. My back hit the cold metal of the locker with a dull thud that echoed through the empty gym. I could still hear the distant cheer of the Friday night crowd outside, but the only sound in this room was my own jagged breathing. I am Lexi Vance, head cheerleader of Westbridge High, and I am 100% straight. I have the varsity jacket from my ex-boyfriend to prove it, even if I threw it in the trash 3 hours ago. So someone really needs to explain why my heart is pounding like a trapped bird just because she walked into the room. Morgan Steele didn't just walk into a room, she invaded it without making a sound. She was wearing her track team tank top, her collarbones glistening with a thin layer of sweat under the fluorescent lights. Her dark eyes locked onto mine with that infuriating, calm confidence that always made my defensive walls crumble. You left your ribbon on the bleachers, Vance, she said, her voice a low, husky drawl that slid right down my spine. She held up the crimson satin bow, dangling it from 2 slender fingers like a trophy. I should have snatched it, said thank you, and walked out into the cool autumn air where things made sense. Instead, my sneakers seemed glued to the linoleum floor as she took a slow, deliberate step toward me. Give it back, I ordered, trying to inject my usual cheer captain authority into the words. My voice betrayed me, coming out as a breathless whisper that barely crossed the distance between our bodies. Morgan didn't stop until the tips of her running shoes brushed against the toes of my white cheer sneakers. The scent of her, clean rain, cedarwood, and something intoxicatingly warm, completely erased the smell of hairspray in the locker room. You look nervous, Lexi, she murmured, leaning one arm against the locker right next to my ear. She was close enough now that I could count the faint, golden flecks in her dark irises. I tilted my chin up, refusing to let a brooding track star intimidate the most popular girl in school. I'm not nervous, Morgan, I'm just tired of you constantly invading my personal space. She tilted her head, a wicked, knowing smirk playing at the corner of her lips. Am I invading your space, or are you just terrified that you don't want me to leave? The audacity of her question sent a rush of hot, indignant blood straight to my cheeks. Don't flatter yourself, I scoffed, pressing my palms flat against the metal behind me to keep my hands from shaking. I like guys, Morgan, tall guys who play football and actually know how to take a girl out. Morgan's gaze dropped slowly from my defiant eyes down to my parted lips, and the temperature in the room instantly skyrocketed. Right, she whispered, her thumb reaching out to gently trace the jawline beneath my ear, sending a shiver straight to my toes. That must be why you've been staring at my mouth for the last 3 weeks. I have not. I gasped, deeply humiliated because she was completely, undeniably right. I hated how effortless she was, how she didn't need makeup or short skirts to command the attention of everyone in the hallway. Most of all, I hated the terrifying, electric pull in my lower abdomen whenever she looked at me like I was the only person alive. Prove it then, she challenged softly, her breath minty and warm against my cheek. Take your ribbon, tell me you feel nothing, and walk away. She held the crimson bow right between our chests, her knuckles barely grazing the collar of my cheer uniform. My brain screamed at me to grab the fabric and run toward the safety of my normal, predictable life. But my body had entirely rewritten its own operating system the moment her skin touched mine. I didn't grab the ribbon. I reached up, twined my fingers into the soft, dark hair at the nape of her neck, and pulled her down to me. I told myself I was doing it to wipe that arrogant, knowing smirk off her beautiful face. I told myself it was just an experiment, a split-second test to prove that two girls kissing meant absolutely nothing to me. The second our lips collided, every single lie I had been telling myself vaporized into thin air. Her lips were impossibly soft, cool at first touch before melting into a searing, demanding heat that made my knees buckle. Morgan made a low, surprised sound in the back of her throat, but she recovered in a fraction of a second. The arm leaning against the locker slid down, her strong arm wrapping securely around my waist and pulling my hips flush against hers. There was nothing hesitant or experimental about the way she kissed me back. It was hunger, pure and unfiltered. My hands slid from her hair down to her shoulders, gripping the fabric of her tank top like I was drowning and she was the only life raft. I opened my mouth under the pressure of hers, tasting the sweetness of my own cherry lip gloss mixed with her intoxicating warmth. Every nerve ending in my body lit up, firing a desperate message to my brain. More. I need so much more of this. I had been kissed by half a dozen guys at school dances and backseats of cars, but none of it had ever felt like this lightning strike. She tilted my head back slightly, deepening the kiss until the locker room, the cheer squad, and my entire identity faded into static. We were moving together in a breathless rhythm, driven by a gravity that I had fought for months and could no longer resist. Her fingers slid under the hem of my cheer top, her warm skin burning against the cool flesh of my lower back. I gasped into her mouth, a soft, helpless sound that made her tighten her grip on my waist. I wanted to stay locked against her forever, to let this forbidden, secret fire burn the rest of my neat little world to the ground. Just as I was about to pull her even closer, Morgan slowly broke the contact, leaving us both panting for air. Her forehead rested against mine, her chest rising and falling rapidly against my uniform. I opened my eyes, my vision blurry, my lips swollen and tingling with an addictive ache that demanded she come back. Morgan looked down at me, her dark eyes dark with desire, but that signature, maddening smirk slowly returning to her face. For a girl who only likes football players, you sure know how to kiss a girl, Lexi, she whispered softly. She tucked a stray strand of blonde hair behind my ear, her touch lingering on my heated skin. Then, she stepped back, leaving me feeling instantly cold and desperately empty. She tossed the crimson cheer ribbon onto the bench beside me, slung her gym bag over her shoulder, and walked toward the exit. "See you at Monday practice, Captain," she said over her shoulder, not even looking back as the locker room door swung shut behind her. I slid slowly down the front of the lockers until I was sitting on the floor, staring at the empty space where she had just stood. My fingers reached up, trembling, to touch my lips, which still burned with the undeniable memory of her taste. I am a cheerleader, I am the queen of the social scene, and I am supposed to be straight. So why am I sitting here on a cold floor, already counting the hours until I can ruin my life and kiss her again? The Monday morning sunlight felt obnoxiously bright as it reflected off the mirror in my bathroom. I applied my signature cherry lip gloss with trembling hands, trying to convince my reflection that I was still the same girl I was last week. I was Lexi Vance, the untouchable cheer captain, the girl who only dated star quarterbacks and spent her weekends at exclusive frat parties. But every time I looked at my own lips, all I could feel was the phantom heat of Morgan Steele's mouth devouring mine. I had spent the entire weekend staring at my ceiling, aggressively reminding myself that I was completely, undeniably straight. Friday night in the locker room was just an anomaly, a bizarre moment of temporary insanity brought on by competitive adrenaline. At least, that was the pathetic lie I kept repeating to myself as I walked through the crowded front doors of Westbridge High. My squad instantly surrounded me, chattering about weekend gossip and upcoming pep rallies like nothing had changed. I nodded and smiled on autopilot, maintaining the perfect, glossy facade that everyone expected from the school's reigning queen. Then, the sea of students parted near the trophy cases, and my heart slammed violently against my ribs. Morgan was leaning casually against a row of blue lockers, wearing a vintage leather jacket over a simple white t-shirt. She wasn't even looking at me, but her mere presence in the hallway seemed to suck all the oxygen right out of my lungs. Her dark hair was messy, falling effortlessly around her sharp jawline in a way that made my fingertips tingle with memory. As if sensing my panic, Morgan slowly turned her head, and her dark, piercing eyes locked directly onto mine. The loud chatter of the high school hallway faded into absolute silence, leaving only the deafening roar of my own pulse. She didn't wave, she didn't smile, she just raised one perfect eyebrow in a silent, devastating challenge. My cheeks flushed crimson, and I quickly averted my gaze, terrified that my best friends could read the dirty secrets written all over my face. Just as I was about to rush my squad down the opposite corridor, a heavy, uninvited hand clamped down on my shoulder. "Hey, Lex, we need to talk," a deep, overly familiar voice boomed right next to my ear. I flinched, spinning around to face Chase, my towering, broad-shouldered ex-boyfriend and the captain of the football team. He was wearing his Letterman jacket, reeking of cheap body spray and the arrogant assumption that I still belonged to him. A week ago, I would have melted into his arms, perfectly content with the picture-perfect high school romance we projected to the world. Today, the weight of his hand on my uniform made my skin crawl with an intense, suffocating wave of claustrophobia. "I don't have anything to say to you, Chase," I snapped, taking a sharp step backward to break his physical contact. He let out a frustrated sigh, stepping closer and attempting to trap me against the cold brick wall of the hallway. "Come on, babe, you've punished me enough for missing that party, let's just get back together," he pleaded, reaching for my waist. His fingers brushed my side, and an involuntary shudder of absolute revulsion ripped through my entire body. My brain instantly compared his rough, clumsy touch to the deliberate, electrifying way Morgan's hands had gripped me on Friday night. There was no spark, no intoxicating cedarwood scent, no desperate hunger that made me want to forget my own name. I shoved his chest hard, my voice rising in a panic that had nothing to do with him and everything to do with the girl watching us from across the hall. "Don't touch me, Chase, it's over, and I mean it this time." I didn't wait to see his shocked expression, nor did I wait for my cheerleaders to ask what was wrong with me. I just turned and fled down the hallway, my sneakers squeaking against the polished floor as I desperately sought a place to hide. I pushed through the heavy double doors of the gymnasium, darting under the metal bleachers toward the old equipment room. The heavy wooden door clicked shut behind me, plunging me into the comforting, dim light of the dusty storage space. It smelled like worn rubber, chalk dust, and isolation, a perfect place to hide while I tried to glue my crumbling identity back together. I leaned back against a stack of tumbling mats, closing my eyes and taking deep, ragged breaths to calm my racing heart. I was fine, I was totally fine, and I just needed a minute to stop my hands from shaking. The quiet click of the equipment room door opening and shutting made my eyes snap open in pure terror. The dim light from the hallway vanished, leaving me trapped in the shadows with a silhouette I would recognize anywhere. Morgan stood leaning against the closed door, the metallic click of the lock echoing loudly in the suffocating silence. "You looked like you needed rescuing out there, Captain," she murmured, her husky voice wrapping around me in the darkness. I swallowed hard, my throat incredibly dry as I pressed my back harder against the stacked gym mats. I didn't need rescuing, I just needed some space from my ex-boyfriend, I shot back, though my voice lacked any real conviction. Morgan let out a soft, dark chuckle that vibrated straight down to my lower stomach. She pushed off the door and began walking slowly toward me, navigating the cluttered room like a predator stalking cornered prey. "Is that why you looked like you were going to throw up when he touched your waist?" she asked smoothly. "That's none of your business," I whispered fiercely, my bravado rapidly dissolving as she closed the distance between us. She stopped mere inches away from me, her tall frame casting a shadow that completely enveloped my much smaller one. I could smell her again, that intoxicating blend of rain and cedar that instantly short-circuited all my rational thoughts. "You're lying to him, you're lying to your friends, and most importantly, Lexi, you're lying to yourself." Her voice was barely above a whisper, but it struck me with the force of a physical blow. "I am straight," I gasped, the words sounding remarkably pathetic even to my own ears. "Are you?" she challenged softly, raising her hand to gently trace the line of my collarbone exposed by my cheer uniform. The light brush of her fingertips sent a violent shockwave of electricity straight to my core, making my breath hitch audibly. "Then tell me to leave, Lexi," she commanded, her dark eyes dropping to my lips. "Look me in the eye, tell me you don't want me to touch you, and I will unlock that door and never bother you again." It was the perfect out, the exact escape hatch I needed to return to my safe, heterosexual existence. All I had to do was say the words. I opened my mouth to tell her to go, to banish her from my life and protect the fragile reputation I had built. But as I looked up into her intense, smoldering gaze, the truth hit me with a crushing, undeniable weight. I didn't want her to leave. I was utterly terrified that she actually would. The craving for her taste was a physical ache in my chest, an addiction that had completely rewired my nervous system in a single weekend. I didn't speak. Instead, I reached out, grabbed the lapels of her vintage leather jacket, and yanked her forcefully against my body. Morgan let out a ragged breath as my back hit the gym mats and she crowded into my space, pinning me exactly where I wanted to be. This kiss wasn't a hesitant experiment like Friday night, it was a desperate, explosive collision of pent-up desire. I parted my lips instantly, welcoming the aggressive heat of her mouth as she backed me firmly against the padded wall. Her hands mapped the curves of my waist with a possessive urgency, her long fingers digging into my hips to pull me flush against her. I tangled my fingers into her dark hair, pulling her closer, deeper, wanting to absorb her directly into my bloodstream. The contrast between Chase's repulsive touch and Morgan's burning caress was so absolute it made me dizzy. She tasted like peppermint and danger, an intoxicating combination that made my mind go blissfully, completely blank. I whimpered into her mouth as her lips left mine to trail hot, open-mouthed kisses down the sensitive skin of my jawline. "Straight girls don't kiss like they're starving, Lexi," she murmured against my neck, her breath sending wild shivers down my spine. "Shut up," I gasped desperately, grabbing her chin and forcing her lips back onto mine to stop her from talking. I didn't want to think about labels, or my squad, or the terrifying reality of what this meant for my life. I only wanted the friction of her body against mine, the taste of her tongue, and the desperate, breathless heat between us. Her knee nudged between my thighs, applying a gentle, suggestive pressure that caused a sudden pool of heat to settle low in my stomach. I arched into her touch instinctively, a soft moan escaping my throat that I could never take back. Morgan swallowed the sound, her kiss turning slower, deeper, and far more devastatingly intimate. I was melting into a puddle on the equipment room floor, completely surrendered to a girl I claimed to hate just days ago. Every time I tried to pull back just to catch a breath, the agonizing withdrawal made me dive right back into her mouth. It was an addiction, pure and simple, and I was deeply, hopelessly hooked on Morgan Steele. Suddenly, the harsh, shrill sound of the passing bell echoed violently through the gymnasium outside. The noise shattered the dark intimacy of the room, dragging me kicking and screaming back to reality. Morgan pulled back slowly, her chest heaving, her lips swollen and shining from my gloss. She looked down at my flushed face, my wrecked hair, and the absolute desperation swimming in my eyes. A slow, triumphant smirk spread across her face, knowing exactly how thoroughly she had just destroyed my defenses. "See you in chemistry, straight girl," she whispered softly, pressing one last, teasing kiss to the corner of my mouth. She stepped back, unlocked the heavy wooden door, and slipped out into the hallway without another word. I stood there alone in the dark, my legs trembling so violently I had to slide down the mat to sit on the floor. My hands covered my face, my heart pounding a terrifying new rhythm as the truth finally settled over me. I could keep telling the school I liked boys, but my body had already made its undeniable choice. I was in so much trouble, and God help me, I couldn't wait to do it again. By Wednesday afternoon, my entire existence had shrunk down to the excruciating countdown between one stolen glance and the next. I pushed my cheer squad through our hardest routine on the track turf, using the physical exhaustion to silence my screaming thoughts. I was Lexi Vance, the undisputed queen of Westbridge High, and I was supposed to be completely immune to jealousy. Yet, my eyes kept wandering away from my synchronized formations to trace a dark-haired figure tearing around the running track. Morgan still moved with a ruthless, effortless grace that made my chest tighten with a suffocating mixture of anger and desire. Every time she rounded the bend near our practice area, the hair on my arms stood up as if the air was charged with static electricity. I told myself I was only watching her to make sure she wasn't going to pull another terrifying stunt like in the equipment room. That pathetic lie shattered into a million pieces when Morgan finished her sprint and slowed to a walk by the bleachers. A petite, pretty sophomore from the distance runner squad immediately trotted over to her with a glowing, eager smile. I missed a step in our routine, my sneakers squeaking awkwardly on the turf as I watched the girl hand Morgan a cold bottle of water. Morgan didn't just take the bottle, she flashed that rare, devastatingly brilliant smile that I thought belonged only to me. The sight of another girl leaning into Morgan's personal space sent a wave of white-hot, possessive rage straight through my bloodstream. My nails dug so deeply into my palms that my skin stung, my breath catching painfully in the back of my dry throat. I didn't care about my perfect reputation anymore, I didn't care about my straight cheerleader persona, and I certainly didn't care about the rules. "Take a 5-minute water break," I yelled to my startled squad, not even waiting for their response before I marched toward the stands. I tracked Morgan's movement as she left the sunlit track and headed into the cool, concrete corridor beneath the stadium bleachers. The shadows instantly swallowed her silhouette, but my body pulled me toward the darkness like a heat-seeking missile. I rounded the concrete pillar just as she was unzipping her gym bag, the echo of my hurried footsteps bouncing off the damp walls. Morgan turned her head, slightly startled by the sudden intrusion, but the surprise quickly melted into a knowing, dangerous smirk. "Aren't you supposed to be leading a cheer practice, Captain?" she asked, her voice echoing softly in the deserted tunnel. I didn't waste time with words, nor did I give my rational brain a single second to stop the madness I was about to commit. I closed the distance between us in 3 rapid strides, grabbed the front of her sweat-dampened tank top, and slammed her against the concrete wall. The water bottle slipped from her fingers, clattering loudly against the floor as I crashed my lips directly onto hers. This wasn't just a kiss born of addiction, it was an aggressive, possessive declaration of territorial war. Morgan let out a breathless gasp against my mouth, but her arms instantly wrapped around my waist with crushing force. She lifted me slightly off my feet, pressing my back against her chest and taking complete control of the collision. I parted my lips aggressively, biting gently at her lower lip until she groaned and granted me deeper access. The taste of her, salty skin, mint, and pure, intoxicating adrenaline, shattered the last remnants of my self-control. I tangled both of my hands into her messy dark hair, pulling her head closer as if I could physically fuse our bodies together. Every second I had spent watching that sophomore smile at her poured out of me in a desperate, bruising rhythm. Morgan kissed me back with a fierce, demanding intensity that made my head spin and my knees go entirely weak. She tilted my chin up with one strong hand, exploring my mouth with a slow, deliberate hunger that made me whimper softly. The cold concrete behind her and the burning heat of her body against mine created a sensory overload that I never wanted to end. We were breaking every rule I had ever set for my life, hidden in the shadows while 20 girls waited for me just outside in the sun. When we finally broke apart for air, our chests were heaving against each other in unison, our breath fogging slightly in the cool tunnel air. I rested my forehead against her shoulder, trembling violently as my heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Morgan's hand slid up from my waist to cup the back of my neck, her thumb gently soothing the goosebumps on my heated skin. "You're jealous, Lexi," she whispered, her voice rough and laced with an undeniable, arrogant triumph. I pulled my head back just enough to glare at her with swollen lips and dark, defiant eyes. "I am not jealous," I lied through my teeth, even as my fingers refused to release their iron grip on her shirt. Morgan let out a low, husky laugh that vibrated against my chest and sent a fresh wave of heat straight to my core. "You practically sprinted off that field just because someone else handed me a drink," she murmured, leaning in until our noses brushed. "You don't want anyone else touching me, Lexi, just like you don't want anyone else kissing you." Her words hit me like a splash of ice water, exposing the raw, terrifying truth I had been trying so hard to bury. It wasn't just about the physical rush anymore, it was the terrifying realization that Morgan Steele had become my exclusive property. Before I could formulate another pathetic denial, the sound of my assistant captain calling my name echoed from the entrance of the tunnel. "Lexi? Where did you go? Coach is looking for you." The voice drifted closer, threatening to shatter our secret world. Panic spiked in my chest, but Morgan simply held me closer for a split second, her dark eyes promising far more danger to come. She leaned in and pressed a lingering, open-mouthed kiss to the pulse point on my neck, making me gasp silently into the darkness. "Go play straight cheerleader, Captain," she whispered against my ear, her breath warm and intoxicating. "But remember whose taste is on your tongue when you fall asleep tonight." She released my waist, stepped around me with infuriating calmness, and disappeared deeper into the shadows of the stadium tunnel. I stood glued to the concrete floor, hurriedly wiping my smeared cherry lip gloss with the back of my trembling hand. I stepped out into the blinding sunlight, my entire world tilting on its axis as I walked back toward my waiting squad. I wasn't just a cheerleader fighting a physical habit anymore, I was a girl falling hopelessly, dangerously off the edge. By Thursday afternoon, the school gymnasium was packed to the rafters for the National Cheer Championship regional qualifiers. The blinding spotlight hit the center of the blue mats where my squad stood in absolute, breathless synchronization. I was Lexi Vance, the undeniable star of the show, born to live under the roaring applause of thousands of people. Yet, as the opening beats of our remix blasted through the speakers, my eyes bypassed the judges entirely. I scanned the sea of faces in the crowded bleachers until I found a single figure standing near the top exit. Morgan Steele was leaning against the concrete railing, dressed in dark denim and her signature vintage leather jacket. She wasn't cheering, she wasn't clapping, but her dark, intense eyes were locked onto me like a physical beam of heat. A sudden surge of reckless, intoxicating adrenaline flooded my bloodstream, replacing every drop of my professional composure. I didn't just want to win this competition, I wanted to force Morgan to see exactly how magnificent I could be. When the routine reached the climax and I climbed to the top of our human pyramid, my brain abandoned the choreographic script. Instead of the standard cradle dismount, I threw my body into a dangerous, high-flying double-twisting layout. The entire gymnasium gasped in unison as I soared through the air, defying gravity for one breathless, terrifying second. I landed cleanly on the mat, my white cheer sneakers absorbing the shock as the crowd erupted into deafening screams. I hit my final pose, my chest heaving, my chin tilted up proudly as I looked straight at the top of the bleachers. Morgan wasn't looking at my perfect form, she was staring directly at my parted, panting lips with an expression of pure hunger. She turned and walked out of the double doors into the dimly lit back hallway without waiting for the judges' scores. I didn't wait for my squad to celebrate our obvious first-place victory, nor did I stop to grab my glittery pom-poms. I pushed through the swarm of congratulatory teammates and sprinted toward the back exit like my life depended on it. The heavy metal door slammed shut behind me, muting the deafening roar of the gymnasium into a dull, distant throb. Morgan was waiting for me in the shadow of the trophy display case, her hands tucked casually into her jacket pockets. "You could have broken your neck out there just to show off, Captain," she said, her voice dropping an octave in the quiet hall. I wasn't showing off, I breathed heavily, my entire body still trembling from the residual adrenaline of the routine. She took 2 slow steps toward me, completely trapping my smaller frame against the cool glass of the trophy case. "You did that flip for me, Lexi, just like you wore that cherry lip gloss for me every single day this week." Her words stripped away my final layer of denial, exposing the raw, desperate truth beating wildly inside my chest. I didn't argue, I didn't defend my straight cheerleader reputation, and I didn't tell her to stay out of my personal space. I reached out, grabbed the collar of her white t-shirt, and pulled her down until our lips collided in a searing crash. This kiss was different from the others. There was no hesitation, no experimental testing, and no defensive armor left to fight with. It was an overwhelming tidal wave of pure, unfiltered need that made my knees completely buckle beneath me. Morgan's arms wrapped tightly around my waist, lifting me up slightly so my back slid against the glass display. I opened my mouth willingly to the demanding pressure of hers, tasting the familiar, intoxicating blend of mint and cedarwood. She deepened the kiss with a possessive urgency that sent electrical sparks flying down every single nerve ending in my spine. My hands tangled wildly in her dark hair, holding her against my mouth as if letting go would make me cease to exist. She tasted like salvation and ruin all at once, a delicious poison that I was happily drinking down to the very last drop. Her thumb traced the sharp line of my jaw before sliding down to rest against the rapidly beating pulse at my throat. "You're shaking, Lexi," she murmured against my lips, her warm breath sending a fresh shiver straight to my core. "Because I'm tired of fighting it, Morgan," I whispered back, my voice cracking with an honesty that terrified me to death. A single tear escaped the corner of my eye, tracing a warm path down my cheek as the weight of my double life crushed me. I was exhausted from pretending to like boys, exhausted from maintaining a perfect facade, and exhausted from denying how much I wanted her. Morgan's expression instantly softened, the arrogant smirk vanishing as she gently brushed the tear away with her thumb. She leaned in and pressed a slow, incredibly tender kiss to my forehead, then down to the tip of my nose, and finally back to my lips. There was no aggression in this touch, only a deep, silent understanding that bound our souls together in the dim hallway. "You don't have to fight anymore, Captain," she whispered softly against my mouth, her arms holding me securely against her chest. I buried my face into the crook of her neck, inhaling the clean rain scent of her skin as I finally surrendered to the truth. "I am Lexi Vance, head cheerleader of Westbridge High, and I am hopelessly, deeply in love with the girl everyone thinks I hate." Just as I let myself relax into her embrace, the door to the gymnasium rattled loudly, signaling someone was coming out to find me. Morgan stepped back reluctantly, her dark eyes promising that this conversation was far from over as she slipped out the side exit. I stood alone in the hallway, wiping my eyes and fixing my uniform, knowing that my life would never be the same again. The Friday night victory party at Chloe's 3-story mansion was louder than an erupting volcano, but I had never felt more completely alone. The heavy bass from the first-floor stereo system vibrated directly through the soles of my designer heels, shaking my very skeleton. I was Lexi Vance, the undisputed champion of the regional qualifiers, standing in the center of the living room like a glittering golden idol. Every popular varsity athlete and popular girl in school was crowding around me, lifting red plastic cups in my honor and screaming congratulations. I wore a stunning, backless metallic dress that I had spent 3 hours selecting, perfectly tailored to scream heterosexual high school royalty. Yet, as I smiled and clinked cups with my teammates, my mouth tasted like bitter ash and my eyes felt raw from hidden exhaustion. I didn't care about the trophy sitting on the kitchen counter, and I certainly didn't care about the endless stream of compliments coming my way. My entire nervous system was hyper-focused on the front door, silently counting every agonizing second that ticked by without her walking through it. I had convinced myself all afternoon that Morgan Steele would never show up to a party filled with loud football players and shallow cheerleaders. She was a private, brooding track star who hated crowds, hated our social scene, and presumably hated everything this mansion stood for. The thought that I might have to survive this entire weekend without the intoxicating taste of her lips made my chest constrict in painful spasms. I reached for another cup of sparkling cider, desperately trying to drown out the phantom sensation of her warm hands gripping my waist. Suddenly, a heavy, familiar arm slithered around my bare shoulders, pulling my smaller frame roughly against a broad, sweat-scented chest. "Here she is, the prettiest captain in the entire state," Chase shouted over the deafening music, his speech slurred heavily from cheap beer. A chorus of drunken cheers erupted from the football players surrounding us as Chase tightened his possessive grip around my collarbone. I stiffened instantly, my muscles turning to absolute stone as my nostrils filled with the suffocating, revolting smell of his alcohol-stained breath. "Let go of me, Chase, I'm trying to talk to my girls," I said through clenched teeth, attempting to wiggle out of his heavy embrace. Instead of releasing me, he spun me around to face him, his bloodshot eyes gleaming with an arrogant, mistaken assumption of ownership. "Come on, Lex, stop playing hard to get in front of everybody. We all know we're getting back together tonight," he crowed loudly. The crowd around us began to chant our names, clapping their hands in a rhythmic, terrifying demand for a public reconciliation kiss. He leaned his face down toward mine, his clumsy lips parting as he aimed directly for my mouth in front of 100 witnesses. My stomach violently revolted, a wave of pure, unadulterated panic and disgust freezing me to the spot like a deer in headlights. I couldn't let him touch my lips. Those lips belonged entirely, exclusively, and hopelessly to a girl who wasn't even here to protect me. Just as I raised my hands to shove his heavy chest away, the heavy double doors of the mansion entrance were pushed wide open. A gust of cool, refreshing autumn air swept into the stuffy, sweat-filled living room, cutting through the haze of cheap perfume and alcohol. The laughter near the entryway died down instantly, a ripple of curious silence spreading rapidly through the packed crowd like a falling domino. I tore my gaze away from Chase's approaching face and looked toward the foyer, my heart suddenly stopping dead in my chest. Standing in the doorway, framed by the moonlight outside, was Morgan Steele, dressed in dark tailored jeans and a long, structured black coat. She looked like a dark, beautiful storm cloud rolling into a room full of fragile, brightly colored birthday balloons. Her messy dark hair was swept back slightly from her face, exposing her sharp jawline and those intense, devastatingly calm dark eyes. She didn't look at the mansion's crystal chandelier, she didn't look at the football players, and she didn't look at the tables of drinks. Her gaze cut through the crowded room like a laser beam, locking directly onto me with an intensity that burned my skin from 50 feet away. She saw Chase's arm wrapped around my bare shoulders, She saw his face leaning dangerously close to mine, and her jaw visibly tightened. There was no smirk on her face tonight, no teasing arrogance, only a cold, dangerous fury that made the breath catch in my throat. In that single, electric second of eye contact, every drop of my fear and hesitation evaporated into pure, unshakable clarity. I didn't care what my cheer squad thought, I didn't care what the football team said, and I didn't care if my reputation burned to ashes. I jammed my palms against Chase's chest with every ounce of physical strength I possessed, shoving him backward so hard he stumbled into a coffee table. I said, "Don't touch me, Chase. We are done, and if you ever put your hands on me again, I will personally break your fingers." I screamed the words over the music, my voice ringing out with a fierce, absolute authority that shocked the entire room into absolute silence. I didn't wait to see the humiliated rage on his face, nor did I wait for my best friend Chloe to ask me what on earth was happening. I lifted the hem of my metallic dress, spun around on my heels, and bolted toward the grand staircase leading to the second floor. I ran up the carpeted steps 2 at a time, my heart hammering a chaotic, desperate rhythm against my ribs as I sought escape. I reached the dimly lit second-floor hallway, darting past closed bedroom doors until I found the secluded master bathroom at the very end. I pushed the heavy oak door open, stumbled into the cool, dark luxury of the marble-tiled room, and spun around to shut it behind me. Before my trembling fingers could even reach the brass doorknob, a strong, booted foot stepped into the doorframe, blocking it completely. The door was pushed open with effortless, quiet strength, and Morgan stepped into the bathroom, closing the heavy oak panel behind us. The loud, thumping bass from the party downstairs was instantly muffled, reduced to a low, distant vibration beneath our feet. The click of the brass lock turning in the darkness sounded like a gunshot, sealing the two of us inside our own private, dangerous universe. The only light in the room came from the pale moonlight streaming through the frosted glass skylight above the massive marble sink. I stood backed against the cool bathroom counter, my chest heaving so violently that the sequins on my dress shimmered in the shadows. Morgan stood by the locked door, slowly peeling off her long black coat and tossing it uncaringly onto a plush velvet chair. Underneath the coat, she wore a tight black sleeveless top that hugged every sculpted muscle of her shoulders and arms. She began walking slowly toward me, her footsteps completely silent against the polished marble floor, her eyes dark and unreadable. "You let him touch you," she murmured, her voice a low, gravelly vibration that sent a violent shiver straight down to my ankles. "I didn't let him do anything, Morgan. I shoved him away the second I saw you," I breathed breathlessly, pressing my palms against the cool marble behind me. She didn't stop until she was standing right between my thighs, her tall frame completely dwarfing my much smaller one in the dim light. The scent of her, clean autumn rain, cedarwood, and that intoxicating, addictive warmth, surrounded me instantly, erasing everything else in the world. "Did you?" she challenged softly, raising one hand to place her palm flat against the mirror right next to my left ear. She leaned in close, her warm breath dancing against the sensitive curve of my neck, making me gasp silently into the empty air. Because from where I was standing, it looked like the Queen of Westbridge High was about to give her loyal subjects exactly what they wanted. Her words weren't teasing tonight, they were dripping with a possessive, raw jealousy that made my blood run boiling hot. "You're an idiot, Morgan," I whispered, my voice trembling with an overwhelming mixture of anger, relief, and desperate desire. I spent the entire night hating every single person in that room just because none of them were you. Morgan's breath hitched audibly against my neck, the cold, defensive armor around her instantly shattering at my raw confession. She pulled her head back just enough to look down into my eyes, her dark irises swimming with a hunger so intense it terrified me. "Say that again," she commanded softly, her free hand coming up to grip my bare waist with a possessive, bruised pressure. "I hated it without you," I cried out softly, tears of pure emotional exhaustion welling up in the corners of my eyes. I am sick of pretending I want guys, I am sick of wearing this stupid dress for them, and I am sick of acting like I don't need you. Before the last word could even leave my lips, Morgan's mouth crashed down onto mine with a feral, earth-shattering intensity. This wasn't just a kiss, it was an explosion of every suppressed emotion, every jealous glance, and every desperate craving we had harbored all week. I opened my mouth instantly, welcoming the aggressive, scorching heat of her tongue as she lifted me effortlessly onto the marble vanity counter. My designer heels dangled in the air as I wrapped my legs tightly around her hips, pulling her body flush against my trembling frame. There was no hesitation, no experimental curiosity, and absolutely no defensive pride left between us in this dark, silent room. Her hands mapped the curves of my back through the open fabric of my dress, her warm skin burning like fire against my bare shoulder blades. I tangled both of my hands into her thick, dark hair, pulling her face closer, deeper into the kiss, trying to breathe her directly into my lungs. She tasted like peppermint, sweet rain, and pure, intoxicating salvation, a flavor that instantly rewired my entire soul. Every time I tried to pull back just a fraction of an inch to catch my breath, Morgan chased my lips, refusing to let me escape her warmth. She tilted my head back with a firm grip on my jaw, her mouth leaving mine to trail hot, open-mouthed, devouring kisses down my throat. I threw my head back against the bathroom mirror, a soft, helpless moan vibrating from deep within my chest as her lips found my pulse point. "Morgan, please," I whimpered desperately, my fingers digging so hard into her shoulders that I was sure I would leave marks. "Please what, Lexi?" she murmured against my heated skin, her teeth gently grazing the sensitive curve of my collarbone, sending shocks through my spine. "Tell me what you want, tell me who you belong to when you're not playing cheerleader for the crowd downstairs." It was the ultimate surrender, the final psychological barrier she was forcing me to tear down with my own two hands. I looked down at her dark, beautiful head resting against my chest, feeling the violent, frantic thumping of both our hearts beating as one. I grabbed her chin gently, lifting her face until her dark, smoldering eyes locked directly with my tear-stained ones. "I want you, Morgan Steele," I whispered clearly, every syllable echoing with absolute, undeniable truth in the quiet bathroom. "I want your mouth, I want your hands, and I don't care if the entire school finds out tomorrow because I belong entirely to you." A look of pure, transcendent reverence washed over Morgan's sharp features, replacing the brooding arrogance with something breathtakingly tender. She didn't say a word, she simply leaned in and captured my lips again, this time with a slow, devastatingly passionate rhythm that made me weep. It was a kiss filled with promises, an intimate, deep exploration that spoke of secret protection and an unbreakable bond. Her hands slid from my bare back around to my ribcage, holding me so carefully, as if I was the most precious thing she had ever touched. We moved together in the pale moonlight, completely oblivious to the hundreds of teenagers drinking and dancing just one floor below us. I drank in her taste, her warmth, and her strength, letting the intoxicating addiction of her kiss completely wash away my old identity. I was no longer the straight cheerleader who lived for the validation of football players and popular girls. I was just a girl hopelessly, deeply, and irrevocably in love with the woman holding me on a cold marble counter. When we finally parted for air many minutes later, our foreheads rested together, our breath mingling in the cool, quiet space. Morgan's thumb stroked my flushed cheek, wiping away the dried tears while her dark eyes gazed at me with pure, possessive adoration. "You're mine now, Captain," she whispered softly against my swollen lips, her voice vibrating with an unshakable certainty. "No more hiding, no more lies, and definitely no more football players." I smiled weakly, resting my cheek against her warm palm, feeling a profound, incredible sense of peace wash over my tired heart. No more hiding, I echoed softly, reaching up to press one last, lingering kiss to the corner of her beautiful mouth. Outside the locked door, the muffled sound of the party raged on, but inside our secret sanctuary, the universe had finally shifted into place. The harsh Saturday morning sunlight cut through the expensive glass windows of Chloe's mansion like a merciless truth serum. I stood in front of the ornate gilded mirror in the second-floor hallway, staring at the absolute wreckage of my carefully curated identity. My metallic golden party dress was hopelessly wrinkled, but it was the reflection of my mouth that truly gave away my darkest secret. My lips were visibly swollen, tinted a deep, bruised crimson that no amount of expensive lip gloss could ever disguise or explain away. Just below my jawline, a faint, undeniable reddish mark burned against my pale skin like a permanent brand of ownership. I was Lexi Vance, head cheerleader and high school royalty, yet I looked exactly like a girl who had spent the night worshipping in the shadows. I could hear the slow, confident footsteps of Morgan Steele pacing behind me on the plush carpet, her dark presence filling the entire corridor. When I turned around, she was leaning casually against the banister, wearing her sleeveless black top with her dark hair falling messily over her forehead. There was no lingering doubt in her sharp, piercing eyes this morning, only a calm, terrifyingly possessive clarity that made my knees shake. "You can't hide those marks with concealer, Captain," she murmured, her low, husky voice sending a familiar, electric vibration straight to my lower stomach. I wasn't trying to hide them, I lied breathlessly, even as my fingers automatically reached up to trace the heated skin of my neck. Morgan let out a soft, dark chuckle, closing the distance between us with 3 silent, predatory strides that completely trapped me against the railing. She didn't care that anyone could walk out of a guest bedroom at any second. She reached out and tangled her fingers gently into my messy blonde hair. She tilted my face upward, her dark irises locking onto mine with a fierce, unwavering devotion that completely stole my breath. "Good," she whispered softly against my lips, pressing one last, lingering morning kiss to the corner of my mouth before stepping back. "Because I am done letting you pretend that you belong to anyone else in this school." She picked up her vintage black leather jacket from the handrail, slung it over one broad shoulder, and gestured for me to walk down the stairs first. My heart was hammering a chaotic, deafening rhythm against my ribs as we descended the grand staircase into the aftermath of last night's party. The massive living room was littered with red plastic cups, sleeping athletes, and the lingering, stale scent of spilled beer and perfume. At the marble kitchen island sat Chloe, my best friend and co-captain, nursing a cup of black coffee with sharp, observant eyes. Her gaze instantly zeroed in on my disheveled appearance, tracking the physical distance between my trembling frame and the tall track star behind me. Before I could even attempt to construct a plausible lie to explain why we were walking downstairs together at 8 in the morning, a loud groan echoed from the sofa. Chase sat up from the leather couch, rubbing his bloodshot eyes and looking around with the heavy, arrogant confusion of a spoiled quarterback. His gaze landed on me, his messy hair standing up on end as he immediately slipped right back into his suffocating, entitled boyfriend persona. "Lex, finally," he grumbled, his voice rough and demanding as he waved an empty glass in the air toward the kitchen sink. "Get over here and pour me some water, my head is absolutely pounding from last night." A week ago, I would have forced a sweet, accommodating smile, rushed to the sink, and played the role of the perfect, supportive varsity girlfriend. This morning, my feet remained glued to the expensive hardwood floor, a cold wave of absolute revulsion washing over my entire body at his tone. I didn't even have to open my mouth to reject him, because the space immediately surrounding me suddenly dropped 10 degrees in temperature. Morgan didn't just walk past me, she stepped directly in front of my smaller frame, creating an impenetrable human shield between me and Chase. With a slow, deliberate movement that commanded the attention of every single waking teenager in the room, she unfolded her heavy leather jacket. She swung the vintage leather over my bare, shivering shoulders, the heavy weight of the jacket enveloping me completely in her intoxicating scent of cedarwood and rain. It wasn't just an act of warmth, it was a loud, unmistakable, and utterly possessive declaration of territorial dominance in front of the entire social elite. Chase froze on the sofa, his bloodshot eyes widening in disbelief as he stared at his varsity jacket's ultimate replacement resting on my shoulders. "What the hell do you think you're doing, still?" Chase barked, his face turning a dark, furious shade of crimson as he pushed himself up from the couch. "She's my girlfriend, take that stupid jacket off her right now." He took 2 heavy, aggressive steps toward us, his broad chest puffing out in a pathetic attempt to intimidate the brooding track star. Morgan didn't flinch, she didn't step back, and she didn't show a single ounce of fear as she faced down the towering football captain. Instead, her long, muscular arm reached out and wrapped firmly around my waist, pulling my hips flush against her side in full view of everyone. Her fingers dug possessively into the fabric of my dress, holding me so tightly against her heat that I could feel the steady, calm beating of her heart. "She isn't your girlfriend, Chase," Morgan said smoothly, her voice ringing out through the quiet kitchen with a lethal, icy authority that chilled the air. "And if you ever speak to her like she's your personal servant again, I will make sure you don't play in the championship game next week." The gasp that escaped Chloe's mouth at the kitchen island was so loud it could have been heard from across the street. Several other cheerleaders and football players who had been sleeping on the floor suddenly sat up, their eyes darting wildly between my red lips and Morgan's hand on my waist. The entire social hierarchy of Westbridge High was holding its collective breath, waiting to see if the reigning queen would push the strange track star away to save her throne. My brain screamed at me that this was the point of no return, the exact moment where my straight cheerleader life would be permanently destroyed. If I pushed Morgan's hand away right now, I could still laugh it off as a weird misunderstanding, reclaim my popularity, and stay safe in my glass castle. I looked at Chase's red, angry face, and then I tilted my head up to look at the sharp, beautiful profile of the girl holding me like I was her entire world. There was no hesitation left in my soul, no lingering desire to hide behind a fake, exhausting heterosexual mask just to please people I didn't even like. I reached down, took Morgan's other hand that was hanging at her side, and twined my slender fingers tightly through hers. I squeezed her hand with all the strength I had, lifting our joined palms slightly so every single person in that living room could see exactly whose side I was choosing. "She's right, Chase," I said clearly, my voice steady, proud, and entirely devoid of the trembling fear that had ruled my life for months. "We are over, and I am leaving with Morgan." The look of utter, catastrophic shock on Chase's face was worth every single sleepless night I had spent crying and worrying about my reputation. Morgan looked down at me, her dark eyes flashing with a sudden, overwhelming wave of pure, triumphant joy that completely softened her cold features. She squeezed my fingers back, her thumb stroking the back of my hand with a fierce tenderness that made my eyes sting with happy tears. Without waiting for Chase to formulate another pathetic insult, or for Chloe to start asking a million questions, Morgan turned us both toward the front entrance. We walked across the living room floor together, our hands locked tightly, my shoulders draped proudly in her black leather jacket. I pushed open the heavy front doors of the mansion, letting the crisp, refreshing autumn breeze wash over our heated faces as we stepped out into the daylight. I was no longer the straight cheerleader living a miserable life for the sake of a high school popularity contest. I was Lexi Vance, and as I walked down the driveway hand in hand with Morgan Steele, I had never felt more dangerously, wonderfully free. By the time I walked through the heavy front doors of Westbridge High on Monday morning, the campus was buzzing like a disturbed hornet's nest. My phone had been vibrating non-stop since Sunday afternoon with group chat notifications, anonymous messages, and leaked photos from Chloe's driveway. I was Lexi Vance, the girl who had ruled this high school social hierarchy with an iron fist and a sparkling cherry smile for 3 entire years. Today, as I walked down the main corridor, the usual chorus of cheerful greetings was replaced by heavy silence and sharp, judgmental whispers. Groups of students parted to let me pass, their eyes dropping instantly to my bare shoulders as if expecting to see Morgan's black leather jacket still draped there. I kept my chin tilted upward, my cheer uniform immaculate, and my posture straight, refusing to let them see how violently my hands were shaking. When I reached my locker, my best friend Chloe was leaning against the adjacent door, her arms crossed tightly over her chest and her expression freezing cold. "You're trending on the school forum, Lexi, and not for winning the regional championship," Chloe said crisply, not even offering me her usual morning hug. "People are saying you dumped Chase because you're hooking up with Morgan Steele, the brooding weirdo from the track team." I slammed my locker door shut with a sharp metallic bang that made a couple of freshmen down the hall flinch in terror. "She isn't a weirdo, Chloe, and whatever I'm doing with my personal life is absolutely none of the squad's business," I countered firmly. Chloe's perfectly sculpted eyebrows shot up in genuine anger, her voice dropping to a harsh, warning whisper as she stepped into my personal space. "It is our business when our head captain is becoming the laughingstock of the entire athletic department right before nationals. You need to fix this right now, Lexi. Go find Chase, tell everyone it was just a drunken misunderstanding, and stay away from Steele." A month ago, the mere threat of losing my popularity and my best friend's approval would have sent me into a full-blown panic attack. This morning, looking into Chloe's shallow, calculating eyes, I felt nothing but an overwhelming, exhausting wave of profound pity. "I'm not apologizing for anything, and I am certainly not going back to Chase," I said quietly, turning my back on her without another word. By noon, the social isolation had fully materialized, transforming the crowded, noisy school cafeteria into my own personal battlefield. I walked out of the lunch line with my tray, scanning the room for my usual round table near the center windows where the varsity athletes Saturday. My cheer squad was already seated there, but Chloe had deliberately placed her designer bag in the single empty chair left at the table. When I caught her eye, she simply looked away, sipping her diet soda in a cold, coordinated silent treatment designed to break my spirit. A low murmur of mocking laughter rippled from the football table nearby, where Chase and his friends were glaring at me with humiliated rage. I swallowed the dry, bitter lump in my throat, changed my direction, and walked toward a completely empty table near the back exit of the cafeteria. I sat down alone, the noise of several hundred teenagers laughing and gossiping washing over me like a suffocating, heavy tidal wave. I stared at my untouched salad, wondering if admitting the truth about my sexuality was worth the absolute destruction of my entire senior year. Before my downward spiral could fully take hold, the heavy double doors of the cafeteria swung open, and the ambient noise in the room noticeably dimmed. Morgan Steele walked into the chaotic lunchroom wearing her dark track sweats and a fitted grey t-shirt, her gym bag slung over one shoulder. She didn't scan the room like she was looking for a place to sit, her sharp, piercing dark eyes locked onto my isolated table instantly. She didn't hesitate for a single fraction of a second as she bypassed the lunch line and strode purposefully across the crowded linoleum floor. Every eye in the room tracked her movement, watching the dangerous, brooding track star march directly toward the fallen cheer queen. She pulled out the metal chair right next to mine, the harsh scraping sound echoing loudly above the hushed whispers of the surrounding tables. She sat down so close to me that our knees immediately brushed under the table, her familiar scent of clean rain and cedarwood instantly banishing my anxiety. "You look like you're attending a funeral, Captain," she murmured, her voice a low, soothing rumble that was meant for my ears alone. "I feel like I'm attending my own," I whispered back, offering her a fragile, self-deprecating smile that barely reached my eyes. They're all watching us, Morgan. Chloe kicked me off the varsity table and the entire football team is waiting for me to start crying. Morgan didn't even bother to glance over her shoulder at the popular tables, treating the school's social elite like they were completely invisible. Let them watch, she said smoothly, reaching into her bag and pulling out a tall, sweating plastic cup filled with a bright pink smoothie. You skipped breakfast this morning because you were nervous about the group chats, so I made you strawberry with extra honey. She pushed the cold cup directly in front of my tray, placing her large, warm hand securely over my trembling fingers on the table. The sheer, thoughtful sweetness of the gesture, contrasted against her tough, intimidating exterior, made my heart do a wild, erratic flip in my chest. From across the room, Chase let out a loud, mocking whistle, clearly trying to incite his teammates into humiliating us in front of the lunchroom. Hey Steele! Are you adopting Chase's leftovers now? One of the linebackers shouted, causing a wave of nervous, ugly giggles to ripple through the room. My cheeks burned hot with instant mortification, my instinct screaming at me to drop my head and shrink away from the cruel attention. Morgan didn't yell back, she didn't flip them off, and she didn't engage in a pathetic verbal shouting match with boys whose brains were made of muscle. Instead, she turned her body completely toward me, slowly lifting one hand to cup the side of my flushed, burning face with infinite gentleness. Her thumb traced my lower lip, wiping away a non-existent drop of strawberry smoothie while her dark eyes held mine with fierce, burning adoration. Look at me, Lexi, she commanded softly, her voice carrying an absolute, magnetic authority that completely blocked out the rest of the world. I looked up into her smoldering irises, watching the arrogant smirk vanish, replaced by an overwhelming, protective tenderness that took my breath away. Right there, in front of 300 judgmental teenagers, my ex-boyfriend, and my former best friends, Morgan Steele leaned in and kissed me. It wasn't the desperate, frantic collision of our secret locker room meetings, nor was it the aggressive territorial claim of the stadium tunnel. It was a slow, incredibly sweet, and breathtakingly tender kiss pressed deliberately against the corner of my mouth and lingering on my cheek. She lingered there for several long, agonizing seconds, her lips warm and soft against my skin, openly broadcasting her complete devotion to the entire school. The entire cafeteria seemed to freeze in collective shock, the mocking laughter dying instantly in the throats of the football players. Someone dropped a metal fork onto a tray, the clattering sound ringing out like an alarm bell in the stunned, breathless silence of the room. When Morgan finally pulled back slightly, her forehead remained resting against mine, a wicked, triumphant smirk playing at the corners of her lips. Let them talk all they want, Lexi, she whispered against my cheek, her breath minty and warm. Because at the end of the day, I'm the one who gets to hold you, and they get to sit over there and be miserable. A sudden, uncontrollable wave of pure, euphoric courage surged through my chest, completely shattering the last remaining fragments of my straight girl facade. Why was I crying over a shallow girl like Chloe and an arrogant jerk like Chase when I had the most incredible, devoted protector sitting right beside me? I smiled brightly, the genuine, radiant smile that I usually saved only for the winning moments under the championship spotlights. I reached down beneath the metal lunch table, found her large, warm hand resting on her knee, and twined my fingers tightly through hers. I gripped her hand hard, claiming her just as fiercely and publicly as she had just claimed me in front of the whole school. Thank you for the smoothie, Morgan, I said clearly, my voice ringing out with a happy, unshakable confidence that made Chloe glare in fury from across the room. It's much better than sitting at that boring table anyway. Morgan's eyes darkened with a sudden surge of pride and raw desire, her fingers squeezing mine back with a crushing, reassuring strength under the table. We spent the rest of the lunch period sitting there together, drinking strawberry smoothies and ignoring the stares of the social hierarchy we had just permanently broken. I was Lexi Vance, and I had just traded my fake crown for something infinitely more dangerous, sweet, and undeniably real. The roaring sound of 10,000 spectators inside the City Sports Arena sounded like a raging, massive ocean storm. I stood in the center of the cramped backstage locker room, staring at the glossy blue uniform that represented everything I had ever worked for. I was Lexi Vance, 3-time regional champion, but today, my own coach was looking at me like I was a toxic liability to the entire school. "You have one simple choice to make right now, Lexi," Coach Miller said coldly, her arms crossed tightly over her clipboard. "You either walk out there, publicly apologize to Chloe and the squad for the distraction, and deny those disgusting rumors, or you hand over your captain's ribbon." The ultimatum hung in the stuffy air of the locker room, a cruel, suffocating trap designed to force me back into my straight, obedient little box. Chloe stood right behind the coach, a smug, triumphant smirk playing on her face as she waited for me to break down and cry. A month ago, the thought of losing my lead spot at Nationals would have destroyed my identity and made me beg for mercy on my knees. Today, looking at the shallow, conditional loyalty of the girls I had bled and sweated for, I felt an incredible wave of liberating defiance. "I am not apologizing for who I love, Coach, and I am certainly not lying just to make you comfortable," I said clearly, my voice ringing out without a single tremor. Coach Miller's face darkened with instant fury, her hand reaching out aggressively toward the crimson satin bow pinned into my blonde hair. "Then give me the ribbon, Vance, you are off the center mat right now," she barked, her fingers brushing the fabric of my uniform. Before her hand could even touch my hair, the heavy metal door of the locker room flew open with a violent, resounding crash. Morgan Still walked into the tense room wearing her official school athletic department VIP badge, her dark eyes flashing with lethal, dangerous lightning. She didn't look at the assistant coaches, she didn't look at the terrified cheerleaders, and she completely ignored Coach Miller's outraged gasp. She walked straight across the linoleum floor, inserted her tall frame between me and the coach, and grabbed Coach Miller's wrist with an iron, warning grip. "If you touch her again, I will personally walk out to those live broadcast cameras and tell the judges exactly why your star captain isn't competing," Morgan said smoothly. Her voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried the chilling, absolute authority of a predator ready to tear down the entire stadium. Coach Miller snatched her hand back, her face turning pale as she realized the catastrophic public relations disaster standing right in front of her. Morgan didn't wait for a response, she turned her back on the entire room, framing my flushed, heated face between both of her strong, warm palms. "You earned this stage, Lexi," she murmured softly, her dark eyes swimming with a fierce, possessive pride that completely banished my lingering anxiety. "Now go out there, show them why you're the absolute queen of this sport, and remember who is waiting for you at the finish line." Right there, in front of the horrified coach and my speechless former best friends, Morgan pulled me forward and captured my lips in a deep, scorching kiss. It wasn't just a kiss of physical craving, it was a pure, electrifying injection of absolute strength and unshakable soul-binding protection. I opened my mouth willingly, drinking in her familiar, intoxicating taste of clean rain and mint, letting the heat of her tongue ignite every nerve in my body. When she finally broke the contact, my lips were swollen, my heart was hammering a fearless rhythm, and my eyes were burning with pure, golden fire. I turned around, brushed past Chloe without giving her a single glance, and led the Westbridge High cheer squad out into the blinding arena spotlights. The music blasted through the massive stadium speakers, shaking the very floor beneath my white cheer sneakers as we launched into our opening routine. I didn't dance for the judges, I didn't cheer for Coach Miller, and I didn't smile for the thousands of strangers watching from the dark stands. I moved across the blue mats with a lethal, breathtaking precision, every flip and spin fueled by the memory of Morgan's hands gripping my bare waist. When the routine reached its terrifying climax, I climbed to the top of the center pyramid, looking straight down into the front row of the VIP section. Morgan was leaning forward against the security railing, her dark eyes locked onto mine, her mouth slightly parted in mesmerized, breathless adoration. I threw my body into the air, executing a flawless, high-flying double-twisting layout that made the entire arena gasp in collective, stunned awe. I stuck the landing with absolute perfection, hitting my final, triumphant pose as the buzzer sounded and the crowd erupted into deafening, thunderous screams. The judges were standing on their feet, clapping wildly, but my brain had already abandoned the competition rules entirely. I didn't stay on the center mat to celebrate with my squad, nor did I wait for the official score announcement to confirm our obvious victory. I broke formation, ran straight toward the edge of the elevated stage, and jumped down onto the arena floor in full view of the national television cameras. The crowd parted in shock as I marched directly up to the front row security railing where Morgan Steele was waiting for me with open arms. I reached up to my hair, pulled out the crimson satin captain's ribbon that Coach Miller had tried to steal from me just 20 minutes ago. Without saying a word, I wrapped the shiny red fabric around Morgan's right wrist, tying it into a tight, secure knot over her pulse point. "I told you," I breathless whispered into her ear as I threw my arms around her neck and pulled her tall frame down against my chest. "I am head cheerleader, I am the queen of this school, and I belong entirely, hopelessly, and proudly to you." Morgan let out a ragged, joyful laugh that vibrated against my uniform, her strong arms lifting me completely off the ground as she buried her face in my neck. Flashbulbs popped blindly around us, capturing the exact moment the straight cheer captain publicly surrendered her crown to the track team's brooding star. The loud, emotional chaos of the high school graduation ceremony faded into a distant memory by midnight. I sat on the hood of Morgan's vintage car, watching the dark ocean waves crash gently against the sandy shore under the moonlight. I was Lexi Vance, officially a high school graduate, no longer defined by a cheer uniform or a popularity contest. I wore a simple white summer dress, my bare feet dangling over the metal bumper as the warm sea breeze tangled my blonde hair. Beside me sat Morgan Steele, wearing her signature dark leather jacket and looking more breathtakingly beautiful than ever before. Her long, muscular arm was wrapped securely around my waist, pulling my back flush against the steady warmth of her chest. I reached down to touch her right wrist, where my crimson satin cheer ribbon was still tied tightly around her pulse point. The fabric was slightly frayed now from weeks of wear, but she had refused to take it off since the day we won nationals. "You're awfully quiet tonight, Captain," she murmured, her low, husky voice vibrating against my shoulder blade. "I'm just thinking about how crazy this entire senior year turned out to be," I whispered back, leaning my head against her shoulder. 3 months ago, I was standing in that locker room swearing to myself that I only liked tall football players. Morgan let out a soft, dark chuckle, her fingers tracing a slow, soothing pattern along the bare skin of my arm. "You were definitely trying very hard to convince both of us," she teased gently, turning her head to press a warm kiss to my temple. "I hated you so much that Friday night," I admitted with a soft smile, closing my eyes to savor the intoxicating scent of clean rain and cedarwood. "You hated how much you wanted to kiss me, Lexi. There's a massive difference," she corrected smoothly, her arrogance tempered by pure affection. I turned my body around on the car hood, straddling her thighs slightly so I could look directly into her deep, dark irises. The moonlight caught the golden flecks in her eyes, reflecting an overwhelming, possessive devotion that made my breath hitch in my throat. "You ruined my life, Morgan Steele," I whispered, reaching up to frame her sharp jawline with both of my hands. "I ruined your fake life, Lexi, so you could finally start living a real one with me," she answered softly, covering my hands with her own. She didn't wait for another word of teasing or reflection. She leaned forward and captured my lips in our 9th and final high school kiss. There was no aggressive challenge in this touch, no desperate hunger born from secrecy or fear of getting caught by our classmates. It was a slow, incredibly deep, and transcendently sweet exploration that felt like coming home after a long, exhausting war. I parted my lips willingly, drinking in the familiar taste of mint and warmth, feeling our heartbeats synchronize in the quiet night air. Her hands slid up the back of my dress, holding me so tenderly, as if I was the absolute center of her entire universe. Every single doubt I had ever harbored about my identity, my future, and my heart dissolved completely into the rhythm of her mouth. I didn't care about what college would bring, or what new challenges we would face when we left this small town behind. As long as I had Morgan holding me against her chest, I knew I could conquer absolutely anything the world threw at us. When we finally broke apart for air minutes later, our foreheads rested together, our breath mingling in the salty sea breeze. She smiled down at me, that rare, brilliant, devastating smile that belonged entirely and exclusively to me. "I love you, Lexi Vance," she whispered clearly, the words carrying the weight of a permanent, unbreakable vow under the stars. "I love you too, Morgan," I replied, pressing one last, lingering kiss to the corner of her lips before tucking my head under her chin. I used to be a straight cheerleader who ruled the school, but now, I am simply Morgan Steele's forever willing accomplice in love.